My mother called it a prop. She actually laughed when she handed me the handwritten check from Grandpa Harold, warning me not to embarrass the family by trying to cash it. It was written for $20,000, a sum she dismissed as a senile fantasy. I had spent 32 years being the compliant daughter. But looking at his shaky signature, something in me snapped. I didn't tear it up. I opened my banking app and hit deposit. The spreadsheet of my life was balanced, predictable, and entirely devoid of surprises. That was exactly how I liked it. At 32 years old, I had cultivated a specific kind of invisibility in the mid-sized city of Briar Glen, Ohio. I worked as a senior billing analyst at Redwood Utilities Group, a job that required me to hunt for discrepancies in water usage and electrical grids. It was quiet work. It suited me. I lived in a modest condo on the edge of town where the homeowners association fees were reasonable and the neighbors kept to themselves. I had careful savings, a paid-off sedan, and a reputation within the Hughes family as the uptight one. Being the uptight one was a role I had accepted long ago. In the theater of my family, everyone had their assigned blocking. My mother, Marilyn, was the tragic heroine, perpetually overburdened by the weight of her own expectations. My older sister, Tessa, was the golden child, the chaotic but charming protagonist who always needed saving but always got the applause. And I was the stagehand. I was the one who remembered to bring the water bottles, the one who double-checked the reservation times, the one who stayed sober to drive everyone home. I was necessary, but I was not interesting. That dynamic held firm even when Grandpa Harold died. The funeral was held in a small, nondescript chapel just outside the city limits of Briar Glen. It was a humid Tuesday, the kind where the air feels heavy enough to wear. The service itself was respectful, if a little generic. The pastor spoke about Harold's love for gardening and his quiet nature, things that were true but felt like bullet points on a resume rather than a portrait of the man I had known. I sat in the second row, watching the back of my mother's neck. She was wearing a black hat that seemed just a little too fashionable for the occasion. Her posture rigid. Beside her, Tessa was dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, a gesture that looked practiced. I felt a profound, aching sadness, but I kept my hands folded in my lap. I did not cry. Crying drew attention, and attention in the Hughes family was a currency I could not afford to spend. Grandpa Harold had been the only person in my life who saw me without looking through the lens of my mother's narrative. He was a quiet man, a man who smelled of peat moss and old paper, while the rest of the family was loud, filling every room with their needs and their dramas. Harold would sit on his porch and just watch. When I was in college, struggling to pay for textbooks because my mother had forgotten to send the tuition support she had promised, Harold had driven 2 hours to my campus. He had met me at a diner, slid an envelope of cash across the table, and ordered a slice of cherry pie. He hadn't made a speech. He hadn't asked for gratitude. He had just asked me what I was studying. He asked about my goals in a way no one else did, listening to the answers with a focused intensity that made me feel like my words actually had weight. One afternoon, years ago, he had told me something I had never forgotten. We were sitting in his backyard, watching a storm roll in over the cornfields. He had looked at me, his blue eyes sharp despite his age, and said, "Don't let anyone rewrite your memory. Alice, if you saw it, it happened. If you felt it, it was real. Don't let them edit you." I replayed those words in my head as the organ music swelled and the service ended. The grief was real. I missed him. I missed the safety of him, but what stung more than the loss was how quickly the atmosphere in the chapel shifted the moment the final prayer was spoken. It was instantaneous. The heavy cloak of mourning was dropped, replaced by the buzzing energy of logistics. My mother stood up, smoothed her dress, and immediately began directing traffic. She pointed uncles toward the reception hall. She coordinated with the funeral director about the flower arrangements. She was in her element. I stood near the entrance, waiting to be told what to do. I heard my aunt whispering to my mother, praising her for her strength. "Marilyn is amazing," the aunt said. She has done so much for Harold these last few years. Just so much. I bit the inside of my cheek. My mother had visited Harold once a month, usually to ask him to sign something. It was me who had organized his pill organizers. It was me who had set up his grocery delivery. But I said nothing. Correcting the record would make me look petty. It would make me look difficult. Alice, my mother's voice cut through the humidity. I turned. Marilyn was standing by the oversized guest book, holding a thick cream-colored envelope. She looked tired, her makeup slightly smudged, but her eyes were bright with that manic energy she always got when she was managing a crisis. "Come here," she said, motioning me over. I walked toward her, my heels clicking softly on the stone floor. Tessa was standing a few feet away, talking to a cousin, but I saw her eyes flick toward us. She was watching. She was always watching. Marilyn took my arm and pulled me slightly to the side, away from the flow of guests. She pressed the envelope into my hand. It felt heavy. "I found this in Dad's desk when we were clearing out the essential papers," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It has your name on it." I looked down. My name, Alice, was written on the front in Harold's shaky, distinctive cursive. The ink was blue. "What is it?" I asked. "Just open it." Marilyn sighed, sounding impatient. "But do it quickly. We have to get to the reception." I broke the seal. Inside was a single slip of paper. I pulled it out. It was a personal check. It was drawn on Pioneer Hearth Credit Union, a bank I recognized as a small, local institution. The date was from 3 weeks ago, shortly before Harold had passed away in his sleep. I stared at the numbers. $20,000. My breath hitched in my throat. I looked at the pay to the order of line. It was my name, Alice Hughes, and in the memo line, written in that same trembling hand, was a single word: starter. I looked up at my mother, shock making my hands numb. "Mom," I said, "this is $20,000. Marilyn let out a short, dismissive laugh. She reached out and patted my hand, the way one might pat a child who has just presented a drawing of a horse that looks like a blob. "Oh, honey," she said, "it is not real." I blinked. "What?" "It is one of Dad's little props," she said, her voice dripping with a pitying sweetness. "You know how he got toward the end? He was confused. He liked to write out these grand gestures to make people feel special. He wrote one for the mailman for $1 million last year. We had to apologize profusely." I looked back at the check. It didn't look like a prop. It looked like a check. The signature was Harold's. The routing number looked standard. He gave me checks for books in college. I said quietly, "Those were real. That was a long time ago." "Alice," Marilyn said, her tone hardening just a fraction. "He had no money in that little credit union account. Tessa and I moved all his primary assets to the main trust years ago to protect him. This is just paper. It is a sweet sentiment, but it is fake." She leaned in closer, her grip on my arm tightening. "Do not embarrass yourself trying to cash that. Alice, do not walk into a bank and try to deposit a $20,000 check from a dead man's empty account. You will get flagged for fraud, and the family will look foolish. We have enough to deal with right now without you making a scene." She plucked the envelope from my fingers and tucked the check back inside, then shoved it into my purse. "Keep it as a keepsake," she said. "Frame it if you want. It is a nice reminder that he loved you, but that is all it is." She stepped back, her face smoothing back into the mask of the grieving. "Capable daughter. Now, go help Tessa load the centerpieces into her car. She is overwhelmed." I stood there for a moment, the weight of the check in my purse feeling like a stone. Marilyn turned and walked away, greeting a neighbor with a tragic smile. I walked outside into the thick Ohio heat. Tessa was standing by her SUV, the trunk open. She was on her phone, typing furiously. When she saw me, she slid the phone into her back pocket and sighed. Finally, Tessa said, "I have been standing here for 10 minutes. Mom said she gave you the keepsake." "The keepsake," I repeated. "The fake check." Tessa said, rolling her eyes. God, it is so sad. He really was losing it at the end. Mom was so worried you would think it was real and go buy a new car or something. I looked at my sister. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She ran a business called Bright Hollow Ventures. Though I was never entirely sure what the business actually did, she was successful, loud, and radiant. I did not think I would buy a car. I said, I just was surprised. Tessa slammed the trunk shut. Look, Alice, I know things are tight for you. I know you are always counting pennies. But do not be that person. Do not be the person chasing a payout at a funeral. It is not a good look. I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. I am not chasing a payout. Then drop it, she said. She flashed me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mom is just trying to protect you. Imagine how humiliating it would be to bounce a check from Grandpa. It would be classic Alice, dramatic and humiliating. She climbed into the driver's seat. Meet us at the reception, she said, and try to smile. You look like you are auditioning for a tragedy. I drove home alone. I didn't go to the reception. I told myself I had a migraine. It wasn't a total lie. The pressure behind my eyes was building with every mile I put between myself and my family. When I got to my condo, the silence was a relief. I kicked off my black heels and walked into the kitchen. I placed my purse on the counter and stared at it. For an hour, I just sat in my living room, watching the dust motes dance in the afternoon light. I thought about Harold. I thought about the way he had looked at me when he told me not to let anyone rewrite my memory. He had not been confused. He had been old. Yes, he had been tired, but Harold had a sharp mind. He did the Sunday crossword in pen until 3 weeks before he died. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I pulled the envelope out of my purse. I laid the check on the granite countertop. I smoothed out the corners. Alice Hughes, $20,000. I turned on my laptop and sat down. I was a billing analyst. Investigating was what I did. I searched the routing number. It belonged to Pioneer Hearth Credit Union. Just as the check said, it was a legitimate institution, a small credit union about 20 miles south of Briar Glen. It wasn't the big bank my parents used. It wasn't the bank where the family trust was held. I looked at the account number. It didn't look like a random string of digits. It followed the standard format. I thought about Marilyn's face, the way she had laughed. It is a prop. If it was a prop, why was she so intense about me not cashing it? If it was fake, the worst that would happen is the teller would say, I am sorry. This account does not exist. But Marilyn had said, you will get flagged for fraud. She had used fear. She knew I hated breaking rules. She knew I was terrified of being in trouble. I picked up the check. The paper felt distinct. It was high-quality safety paper, the kind with the little fibers woven into it. Don't let anyone rewrite your memory. Grandpa Harold didn't play pranks. He didn't do props. He was a man who labeled his tools in the garage. He was a man who kept a ledger for his garden expenses. I debated it. If I deposited it, and it bounced, I would get a fee, maybe $30. I could afford $30. If I deposited it, and it was fraud, the bank would call me. I would explain my grandfather gave it to me. I had the physical check. I wasn't forging anything. But if I didn't deposit it, I was agreeing with Marilyn. I was agreeing that Harold was senile. I was agreeing that I was the kind of person who needed to be managed, who couldn't be trusted with a piece of paper. I felt a surge of something hot and unfamiliar in my chest. It wasn't quite anger. It was more like defiance. I took out my phone. I opened my banking app. My thumb hovered over the deposit check button. Classic Alice, dramatic and humiliating. Tessa's voice echoed in my head. I gritted my teeth. I would not let them decide this for me. I would know the truth, even if the truth was that I was a fool. I tapped the screen. The camera opened. I placed the check on the dark granite to get a good contrast. I aligned the corners within the little white box on the screen. Snap. The front was captured. I flipped the check over. My hand was shaking slightly as I signed the back. For mobile deposit only, Alice Hughes. I took the photo of the back. Snap. I typed in the amount, $20,000. The app asked for confirmation. Deposit $20,000 to checking. I took a deep breath. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I hit confirm. The screen spun for a second, a little wheel turning. Then, a green checkmark appeared. Deposit pending. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I put the phone down, face down on the counter. It was done. I made myself a cup of tea. I paced around the condo. I tried to read a book. The silence of the apartment felt different now. It felt charged. I had done something forbidden. I had disobeyed a direct order from my mother. I went to bed early that night, but I didn't sleep well. I kept dreaming of Harold standing in a cornfield, holding a ledger, trying to shout something to me, but the wind was too loud. The next morning, I woke up at 6. I grabbed my phone before I even got out of bed. I opened the banking app. Current balance, $24,312. My heart stopped. I clicked on the transaction history. Mobile deposit, $20,000. Status, funds available. It had cleared. It wasn't pending. It wasn't held. The money was there. I sat up in bed. The sheets pooling around my waist. The room spun slightly. It cleared. That meant the account existed. That meant the account had at least $20,000 in it. That meant Marilyn was wrong. No, Marilyn was never wrong about money. Marilyn knew every cent Harold had. She had managed his affairs for 5 years. If Marilyn said the check was a fake, and the check was real, then Marilyn had lied. She had looked me in the eye, at her own father's funeral, and lied to me. She had tried to scare me out of $20,000. Why? To protect the estate? To keep me from having money? A cold feeling washed over me. Dread. The money was in my account, but instead of feeling rich, I felt exposed. I felt like I had tripped a wire. Ping. A notification slid down the top of my screen. It was an email from the bank. My stomach dropped. Here it comes. The fraud alert. The bounce. I opened the email. Subject. Message from Pioneer Hearth. Credit Union, regarding your recent transaction. I clicked it, my fingers trembling. Dear Alice Hughes, we are processing a significant incoming transfer from an account within our institution for verification purposes. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to confirm beneficiary details. This is a standard procedure for transactions of this nature. I read it twice. It wasn't a rejection. It was a verification request. Beneficiary details. They weren't treating me like a thief. They were treating me like a customer, but the dread didn't go away. It deepened. This message was the first domino. By contacting them, I would be making this official. I would be crossing a line that I couldn't uncross. I went to work. I sat at my desk at Redwood Utilities and stared at spreadsheets of water usage. The numbers blurred. I felt like I was carrying a grenade in my pocket. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped. At 5:30 in the evening, I was back in my condo. I was chopping vegetables for a salad I had no appetite for. My phone rang. The screen said, "Mom." I stared at it. The buzzing sound seemed incredibly loud in the quiet kitchen. I wiped my hands on a dish towel. I took a deep breath. I answered, "Hi, Mom, Alice, sweetheart." Marilyn's voice filled the line. It was soft, warm. It was the voice she used when she wanted to know if I was seeing anyone, or if I had gained weight. "How are you holding up?" "It was such a long day yesterday. I am fine." I said, "Just tired. I know. We are all exhausted. Tessa is just a wreck today. She loved him so much." I said nothing. There was a pause, a beat of silence that lasted just a second too long. "So," Marilyn said, her tone shifting into something casual, almost breezy. "Did you do anything with that little check I gave you? I was thinking about it today, and I just wanted to make sure you didn't accidentally try to use it. I would hate for you to have to deal with the bank fees." My hand tightened around the phone. She was fishing. She was checking the trap. If I told her I deposited it, the explosion would be immediate. She would demand I return it. She would scream. She would come over. I looked at the notifications on my screen. Funds available. I closed my eyes. I haven't had time. I said, the lie tasted like copper in my mouth. I had never lied to my mother about anything significant. I was the honest one, the boring one. "Oh, good," Marilyn said. You can practically hear the relief in her voice. "That is good. Just shred it, honey, or keep it in a scrapbook. But don't bother with the bank." "Okay," I said. "All right. Well, get some rest. We have the reading of the will next week. We need you to be fresh. I love you." "Mom," I said automatically. "Love you too." "Sweetie?" The line went dead. I lowered the phone. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I had lied. I had the money, and I had a message from a bank I didn't belong to, asking me to verify a transaction that my mother swore was impossible. I looked at the empty kitchen. I wasn't just a billing analyst anymore. I was someone who was hiding $20,000 from her family, and tomorrow, I had to call Pioneer Hearth Credit Union. I wasn't sure what I was going to find, but I knew one thing for certain. Harold hadn't left me a prop. He had left me a thread, and I was going to pull it. Pioneer Hearth Credit Union was not the kind of place my mother would bank. It sat in a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a discount shoe store. Its signage faded to a pale, dusty blue. It lacked the marble floors and hushed, cathedral-like atmosphere of the downtown bank where the Hughes Family Trust was managed. This place smelled of stale coffee and carpet cleaner. It felt forgotten. I walked in at 9 in the morning, clutching my purse against my side as if it contained state secrets. I had called in sick to Redwood Utilities for the first time in 3 years. My voice had shaken when I spoke to my manager, but the lie I told, a vague stomach bug, felt easier than the truth, which was that I was currently investigating my own inheritance behind my family's back. I sat in a pleather chair across from a man whose name tag read David, Member Services. He looked to be in his late 50s, with kind eyes and a tie that was slightly too wide for the current fashion. He had been typing on his keyboard for a long time, frowning at the screen. "Ms. Hughes?" David said, finally stopping. He folded his hands on the desk. "Thank you for coming in so quickly." I swallowed hard. "Is there a problem? Is the check? Did it bounce?" David looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "No, ma'am," he said. "The funds are secure. The check cleared yesterday. The air left my lungs in a rush. It was real. Marilyn had lied. Then why did I need to come in?" I asked. David turned his monitor slightly, though not enough for me to see the details. "The account this check was drawn from, your grandfather's personal checking, has been under a specific status for the last 6 months. He said carefully, "We call it high monitoring." "High monitoring?" I repeated. "What does that mean?" "It usually means the account holder has flagged the account for potential unauthorized activity, or there have been attempts to access it that did not clear our security protocols." My stomach twisted. Unauthorized activity? David hesitated. He looked at the door of his office, which was closed, then lowered his voice. "Ms. Hughes, I cannot give you the full transaction history without a court order. However, since you are now a verified payee and the funds have cleared, I can tell you that in the 2 months prior to Harold Hughes's passing, we received 3 separate requests to change the contact information and the beneficiary designations on this account." I stared at him. "Who made the requests?" "They were submitted via online banking and phone." David said, "But they failed our verification questions. The caller could not provide the correct security phrase. Your grandfather set up this account 20 years ago. He was very particular about his security. I thought about Harold. I thought about his meticulous nature." "So, someone tried to take over the account?" I asked. "Someone tried to redirect it," David corrected, "and because of those attempts, the system automatically flagged any large withdrawal, like a $20,000 check, for manual review. That is why we contacted you. We needed to make sure you were actually you, and not whoever was trying to change the password." I felt a cold prickle of sweat on the back of my neck. "Did Grandpa know?" I asked. "Yes," David said. "He came in personally 4 months ago. He was quite upset. He sat right where you are sitting. He tapped a few keys. There is something else. Ms. Hughes." This checking account was linked to a secondary savings account, a small one. It was set up to auto-transfer funds into the checking account to cover specific expenses. He looked at me, his expression softening. "I am not supposed to show you this," he said, "but I think Harold would want you to see the descriptions." He printed a single sheet of paper and slid it across the desk, face down. I turned it over. It was a transaction log for the last year. I scanned the rows. The amounts were modest, $300 here, $50 there, but it was the memo lines that stopped my heart. November 12. Property tax, cabin, December 1st, care, receipt required. December 15th. Alice, Christmas, January 1st, care, receipt required. January 10th. Alice, birthday. I looked up at David, my vision blurring. "He was saving for me?" I whispered. David nodded. "He never sent those transfers to you, did he?" "No," I said. "I never received a dime. The money went into the checking account," David explained. "But it never went out. It just sat there, accumulating. It seems he was building a balance. He told me once that he was stockpiling for a rainy day. I looked at the date of the check Marilyn had given me. It was dated 3 weeks ago. This wasn't a prop," I said, my voice trembling. "This was a plan." David took the paper back and shredded it. "Ms. Hughes, there is a note on the file." He said, "A letter of instruction. It is an old-school way of doing things. But your grandfather was an old-school man. It directs us that if a specific individual, you, successfully deposits a check from this account, we are to refer you to a third party for the remainder of the documentation." "A third party?" "Grafton and Hale Estate Services," David said. "Do you know them?" I shook my head. "My family uses a firm downtown." David gave me a small, knowing smile. "That is likely why he chose Grafton and Hale." Grafton and Hale was located on the second floor of a brick building on the quiet side of town, above a bookstore. The stairs creaked as I walked up them. The waiting room was small, lined with dark wood bookshelves filled with actual law books, not decorative ones. I did not have to wait long. A woman opened the frosted glass door. She looked to be about 50, wearing a gray cardigan and reading glasses on a chain. "Alice Hughes?" she asked. "Yes, I am Mara Grafton. Please, come in." Her office was cluttered but organized, piles of files stacked in neat towers on her desk. She gestured for me to sit. She didn't offer me coffee. She didn't offer me condolences. She simply sat down, folded her hands, and looked at me with an intensity that made me sit up straighter. The credit union called me. Mara said, "They said the deposit cleared." "Yes," I said. "Show me," she said. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Show me the proof." Mara said calmly, "I need to see the deposit receipt and the image of the check." I fumbled for my phone. I opened the banking app and navigated to the transaction history. I handed her the phone. Mara studied the screen for a long time. She zoomed in on the image of the check. She checked the date. She checked the signature. Then, she handed the phone back to me. Her expression didn't change dramatically, but the tension around her mouth loosened. She nodded. "Once. Okay," she said. "That is the key." She opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. It looked like something from a Victorian novel, completely out of place in 2026. Harold was very specific. Mara said, "He came to me 6 months ago. He was lucid, he was sharp, and he was worried. He told me that he was under immense pressure from his family regarding his estate. He told me." I whispered. He said, "Don't let them rewrite your memory." Mara nodded. He was concerned that his primary will, the one your mother manages, would be used to control the family narrative. He wanted to leave something outside of that system, something that couldn't be blocked, argued, or managed by Marilyn. She pushed the envelope across the desk. "This is for you." I took the envelope. My hands were shaking. I broke the wax seal. Inside was a letter, handwritten on yellow legal pad paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was shaky, but the letters were formed with determination. "Dear Alice, if you are reading this, It means you finally disobeyed your mother. Good. I am sorry for the tests. I am sorry for the secrecy. You know how loud your family gets when money is near. They stop hearing people and start hearing numbers. I didn't want you to be a number. The $20,000 is not a reward. It is a starter key. It is enough money to hire a lawyer, or put a down payment on an apartment where no one has a spare key, or just to breathe for a few months without panic. It is enough to make you unpressurable. You are the only one who never asked me for a thing. Alice, that is why I am leaving you the headache of the truth. I have tried to protect the cabin, but I fear they are moving paperwork around me. Check the cabin paperwork. Do not let them sell it before you know what it is. Love. Grandpa. I read the letter 3 times. I traced the ink with my thumb. Unpressurable. That was what he wanted for me. He didn't want me to be rich. He wanted me to be free. I looked up at Mara. What cabin? I asked. I didn't know he owned a cabin. Mara leaned back in her chair. Harold owned a small property in Mason Ridge, she said. He bought it 30 years ago. He used to go there to fish. He told me he intended for it to remain in the family, but not as an asset to be liquidated. He wanted it to be a place to retreat. She hesitated. When we drafted this letter, the deed was in his name. But Alice, I have limited access to his primary assets, Marilyn and your sister. Tessa held his power of attorney for the last year. If there is paperwork regarding a cabin, you will need to find it. I feel like I'm walking in the dark. I said, Mara looked at me, then turn on a light. Alice, but be careful. If they find out you have this letter, or that you have been here, they will close ranks. You need to gather information before you make an accusation. I left her office feeling heavier than when I arrived. I had the $20,000. I had the letter. But I also had a mystery that felt dangerous. Check the cabin paperwork. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. I needed to know if Marilyn knew. I needed to see her face when I said the word. I dialed my mother. She answered on the second ring. Hello? She sounded distracted. I could hear the rustle of papers in the background. Hi, Mom, I said. I am just on my lunch break. I had a quick question. Make it fast. Honey, I am meeting with the caterer for the celebration of life. I was just thinking about Grandpa. I said, keeping my voice level. Do you remember him ever talking about a cabin? Like a fishing cabin? The silence on the other end was absolute. The rustling of papers stopped. What? Marilyn asked. Her voice was sharp, like a whip crack. A cabin, I said, forcing a casual tone. I had this vague memory of him taking me fishing when I was really little, in Mason Ridge, maybe? Why would you ask that? Marilyn snapped. Her tone was aggressive, defensive. I just missed him. I said, I was wondering if it was still in the family. There is no cabin. Alice, Marilyn said, her voice rising in pitch. God, you are exhausting. Why are you digging up ancient history? He sold that place 20 years ago. It was a dump, a shack. She paused. And then, the shift happened. The aggression evaporated, replaced instantly by a wet, trembling sound. Oh, Alice, she sniffed. I am sorry. I am just so stressed. Grandpa he was so confused near the end. He kept talking about that old shack like it was a palace. It broke my heart. He didn't know where he was half the time. I gripped the phone tight. He was lucid. Mara had said, he was sharp. You are right. Mom, I said softly, I am sorry. He was talking nonsense. Marilyn continued, her voice gaining strength in its victimhood. And now you are asking about it, and it just feels like you are taking advantage of his confusion. Can we please just focus on honoring him? Yes. Mom, I said. Of course. I hung up. She was lying. The snap, the backtrack, the tears. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times, but I had never seen the strings before. Now, I saw them. She was terrified of the word cabin. 2 days later, my sister Tessa texted me. Coffee? Need to see my baby sis. Treat is on me. It was followed by a heart emoji. Tessa never bought me coffee. Tessa never called me baby sis unless she wanted something. I agreed to meet her at the Grind, a trendy coffee shop in downtown Briar Glen, where the baristas wore leather aprons and the lattes cost $8. Tessa was already there when I arrived. Sitting at a window table, she was wearing oversized sunglasses and a cashmere sweater that looked effortlessly expensive. She stood up and hugged me, enveloping me in a cloud of expensive perfume. "Alice, you look tired." "Sweetie," she said, pulling back to inspect my face. "Are you sleeping?" "Not really," I said, sitting down. Tessa sighed dramatically. "I know. It is all just so much. I have been crying nonstop." She took a sip of her iced oat milk latte. She didn't look like she had been crying. She looked immaculate. "So," she said, leaning in, "Mom told me you asked about the old fishing shack." I took a sip of my black coffee. "I just remembered it." Tessa nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, Mom was pretty upset. She feels like you are. Looking for things. I am not looking for things." I said, "I am just remembering him." "Right," Tessa said. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her palm was cool and dry. "Look, Alice, I want to be real with you. Mom is struggling. The funeral costs were astronomical. The casket alone was $10,000. And the catering? A nightmare." I watched her face. I waited. "She is too proud to ask," Tessa said, lowering her voice. "But I know she is worried about cash flow until the estate settles. And I was thinking, since you have that little check Grandpa gave you." She paused, waiting for me to fill the silence. I know Mom said it was fake," Tessa continued. "A little faster now, but let's be honest. Knowing Grandpa, there might be a few bucks in that account, even if it is just $1,000, or whatever. If you could just transfer whatever clears to Mom, to help with the costs, it would keep things smooth." I stared at her. "Keep things smooth." I repeated. "Exactly," Tessa said, squeezing my hand. "You don't want to be the one holding on to money when Mom is drowning in bills, right? It would look—" The manipulation was elegant. It framed me as the villain if I kept the money, and the hero if I gave it up. But there was a flaw in her logic, if the check was fake. As they claimed, there would be no money to transfer. By asking for it, Tessa was admitting they knew it was real, and by asking for it, to help Mom, she was admitting they knew exactly how much it was. $20,000 covers a lot of catering," I said. Tessa's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Well, every bit helps," she said. I pulled my hand back. "I can help," I said. I lied. I felt the power of it, but I need to see the bills first. I am a billing analyst. "Tessa, I can't just transfer money without an invoice. It triggers tax issues for me." Tessa blinked. "Tax issues? If I gift Mom $20,000, I have to report it," I said. "But if I pay the funeral home directly, it is different. Just send me the itemized bill from the funeral home. I will pay them directly." Tessa's smile froze. It became a rictus, a showing of teeth. "You do not need to see the bill, Alice," she said, her voice dropping the warm, sisterly effect. "Just send the money to Mom. Why do you have to be so difficult?" "I am not being difficult," I said, leaning back. "I am being responsible. Isn't that what you guys always call me? The responsible one?" Tessa stared at me. Her eyes were cold, assessing. "Fine," she said, grabbing her purse. "I will ask Mom for the bill. But honestly, Alice, this pettiness, it is why Grandpa worried about you." She stood up and walked out, leaving her half-finished $8 latte on the table. I waited until she was gone, then I took out my phone. I searched for the funeral home. Briar Glen Memorial Services. I called the number. Briar Glen Memorial. "This is Sarah." "Hi, Sarah," I said. "This is Alice Hughes. My grandfather, Harold Hughes, was buried through your services last week." "Oh, yes, Miss Hughes, my condolences. Thank you. I am just calling because my mother, Marilyn, is a bit overwhelmed with the paperwork. She asked me to handle the final payment, but I seem to have misplaced the invoice. Could you tell me the outstanding balance? One moment. Let me pull that up. I heard clicking. Okay, here it is, Sarah said. The total cost of the service, including the casket and the plot preparation, was $8,400. $8,000? I asked. Yes, ma'am. And it looks like… Oh, wait, this was prepaid. Prepaid? Yes. Harold Hughes purchased a prepaid funeral plan 5 years ago. The entire balance was covered by his insurance policy. The only out-of-pocket cost was $400 for the extra flowers your mother ordered. $400. I felt a wave of nausea. Thank you. Sarah, I said, can you email me that receipt? Certainly. I hung up. Tessa had sat across from me, held my hand, and lied to my face. She had tried to guilt me into handing over $20,000 to pay for a funeral that was already paid for. There was no financial emergency. There was no cash flow issue. They just wanted the money back. They wanted to strip me of the one thing Harold had given me to make me unpressurable. It wasn't about the money. It was about the control. If I had the money, I had options. If I had options, I didn't need them. I opened the Notes app on my phone. I created a new folder. I named it Receipts. I typed in the first entry. Date, January 24th. Event, meeting with Pioneer Hearth. Confirmed check is real. Confirmed high monitoring due to attempted unauthorized changes to Grandpa's account. Date, January 24th. Event, meeting with Mara Grafton. Received letter, confirmed existence of cabin and Grandpa's fear of family pressure. Date, January 24th. Event, phone call with Mom. She denied the cabin exists. Claimed Grandpa was confused. Contradicts Mara's assessment of his lucidity. Date, January 26th. Event, coffee with Tessa. She asked for the $20,000 for funeral costs. Claimed costs were astronomical. Date, January 26th. Event, call to funeral home. Confirmed funeral was prepaid by Grandpa. Outstanding balance, $400. I looked at the list. It looked like a billing audit. It looked like a fraud investigation. I wasn't revenge-minded. I wasn't a vindictive person. But looking at the timeline, seeing the lies stacked up in black and white, something inside me hardened. They were building a cage for me, made of gaslighting and guilt. But Harold had slipped me a key. I wasn't going to just unlock the door. I was going to take the door off its hinges. I closed the app and stood up. I left a $5 tip for the coffee I barely drank. I walked out into the sunshine of Briar Glen. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the small, quiet daughter. I felt dangerous. The building where Grandpa Harold had lived for the last 10 years was a brick structure called the Oak Haven. It was sturdy, sensible, and completely unpretentious, much like him. I drove there on a Wednesday afternoon, telling myself I needed to check if any stray mail had accumulated in his box. Even though I knew Marilyn had likely forwarded everything weeks ago, I parked my car and walked into the lobby. The air smelled of floor wax and old radiator heat. I fumbled with my key to the mailroom, but before I could turn the lock, the door to apartment 1B opened. Mr. Donnelly stepped out. He was a retired history teacher who always wore cardigans and walked with a cane that had a brass duck's head for a handle. He and Harold had played chess on Tuesdays. Alice, Mr. Donnelly said, stopping in his tracks. I haven't seen you since the service. I gave him a polite smile. I am just checking the mail. Mr. Donnelly. He looked at me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He didn't move to let me pass. Instead, he took a half step closer, lowering his voice. Your mother came by last week, he said. She took the key. I nodded. That makes sense. She is the executor. Mr. Donnelly tapped his cane against the linoleum. She was in a hurry, he said. She and your sister. They were clearing things out very fast. I asked if they wanted help with the books, but they said it was all trash. I felt a pang of sadness. Harold's books were not trash. Mr. Donnelly hesitated, then looked over his shoulder as if checking for listeners. Alice? he said. I don't want to speak ill of family, but Harold was upset the last few months. Upset how? I asked. He kept asking me where his mail went. Mr. Donnelly said. He said he hadn't seen a bank statement in 3 months. He thought the post office was losing them. He called the bank, but he said the security questions had been changed. He was very frustrated. He said he felt like he was being ghosted by his own life. The words landed like a stone in my stomach. Security questions had been changed. He told me he was going to go down there in person. Mr. Donnelly continued. And then, a week later, he passed. I stared at the brass duck on his cane. Did he ever mention a cabin to you? I asked. In Mason Ridge? Mr. Donnelly's eyebrows shot up. Oh, yes. He talked about that place all the time. He said he was going to fix up the roof so you could use it. He said he wanted to make sure it was ready for the summer. My heart hammered against my ribs. Marilyn had told me the cabin was sold 20 years ago. She had called it a dump. Thank you. Mr. Donnelly, I said, you have no idea how much that helps. I left the Oak Haven without checking the mail. I didn't need to. I knew now that the mail hadn't been lost. It had been intercepted. I went straight to the county recorder's office website when I got home. I sat at my kitchen table, my laptop screen glowing in the dim light of the evening. I was a billing analyst. I knew how to follow a paper trail. If real estate had changed hands, there was a deed. I searched Harold Hughes. A list of documents populated. Most were old. The purchase of his condo, the release of a mortgage from 1998, but at the very top of the list, dated 2 months ago, was a document type that made my breath catch. Quitclaim deed. I paid the $5 fee to download the PDF. The document opened. It was a transfer of ownership for a property in Mason Ridge, described as Lot 4, Lakeside Subdivision, Grantor, Harold Hughes, Grantee, Bright Hollow Ventures, LLC. I stared at the name, Bright Hollow Ventures. It sounded corporate, vague, but I had seen that name before. It was on the business card my sister Tessa had slipped into my pocket at Christmas, telling me she was branching out into asset management. I looked at the signature, Harold Hughes. It was a scrawl. It looked weak. It looked like the signature of a man who was lying in bed, or who was being supported by someone else's hand. And then I looked at the notary stamp, Elliot Vance, Notary Public. I checked the location of the signing. The notary block stated the document was signed in the county of Briar. At an address on Willow Creek Drive, I typed the address into my map app. It wasn't Harold's apartment. It wasn't the hospital. It wasn't a law office. It was my mother's house. Marilyn and Tessa had brought a notary to Marilyn's house, and somehow they had gotten Harold there, or they had claimed he was there, to sign away a piece of property that he had told his best friend he was fixing up for me, and they had done it for $0. The consideration line read, "For the sum of $1 and other good and valuable consideration." They had taken the cabin, they had moved it into Tessa's shell company, and when I asked about it, they had gaslit me into believing it didn't exist. I printed the deed. The paper was warm when it came out of the printer. I held it in my hand. It wasn't just proof of a lie, it was proof of theft. Mara Grafton's expression was unreadable as she studied the quitclaim deed the next morning. She adjusted her glasses, her eyes scanning the notary block. "This is aggressive," she said finally. "Is it legal?" I asked. On its face, yes, Mara said. "It is a signed, notarized deed recorded with the county. It transfers the title from your grandfather to this LLC, but he didn't want this," I said. "He left me a letter mentioning the cabin paperwork. He told his neighbor he was fixing it up for me. And look at the date, Mara. It is 2 months before he died. Marilyn told me he was confused. If he was confused, he lacked the capacity to sign this." Mara looked up at me. Her gaze was sharp. "That is the needle you have to thread. Alice, if you argue he was incompetent, you void the deed. But you also risk voiding the check and the letter he left you. If he was too confused to sell a cabin, he was too confused to write you a check for $20,000. I paused. I hadn't thought of that. They had trapped me in a logic loop. But if he was competent, I said slowly, then he signed this willingly. Or, Mara said, leaning forward, he signed it under duress, undue influence. If they isolated him, controlled his information, like hiding his bank statements, and pressured him to sign a document he didn't understand or didn't want to sign. That is fraud. She tapped the paper. We need to know his medical status on that specific day. Marilyn will claim he was having a good day when he signed this, and a bad day when he wrote your check. We need objective truth. I can get his records. I said, I am a beneficiary. Do it, Mara said. But Alice, be quiet about it. If they know you have this deed, they will circle the wagons. They will say you are attacking his legacy. They already are. I said, getting the medical records was surprisingly easy. As a named beneficiary in the estate process, even the limited one Marilyn was running, I had rights to view the medical history for the purpose of understanding the timeline of his decline. I went to the clinic where Harold had his primary care. I sat in the records department, filled out a form, and waited 40 minutes. When the clerk handed me the file, I went straight to the section for the last 6 months. I found an entry dated 3 days before the deed was signed. Annual wellness visit/cognitive assessment. I read the doctor's notes. Patient is alert and oriented ×4. Scored 28 out of 30 on the mini mental state examination. Recall is sharp. Patient expresses frustration with family dynamics, but shows no signs of dementia or cognitive decline. Judgment appears intact. 28 out of 30. He wasn't confused. He wasn't senile. He was sharp as a tack 3 days before he supposedly signed away his beloved cabin for $1. I took a picture of the page with my phone. Marilyn's narrative wasn't just an exaggeration. It was a fabrication designed to strip him of his agency so she could strip him of his assets. I drove home feeling a cold rage settling in my chest. It wasn't the hot, tearful anger of grief. It was the mechanical, calculating anger of a billing analyst who has found a discrepancy that cannot be explained by error. This was embezzlement. I was in my condo, organizing the growing file of documents on my dining table. When the doorbell rang, I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Marilyn. She was holding a large canvas tote bag and a foil-covered dish. She looked like the picture of a concerned mother. I unlocked the door. "Mom? Alice!" Marilyn breezed past me, bringing a gust of wind and floral perfume into my quiet sanctuary. "I was just in the neighborhood and I brought you some lasagna. I know you hate cooking when you are stressed." She set the dish on the kitchen island and turned to look at me. Her eyes scanned the room. I had swept the papers off the table into a drawer the moment the doorbell rang, but the laptop was still open. "Thank you," I said, standing between her and the table. She smiled. It was a bright, brittle thing. "I also brought this," she said, lifting the tote bag. "I was going through the attic and I found these old photo albums. I thought we could look through them together. Just have a nice moment. We haven't had a nice moment in so long." She moved to the sofa and patted the cushion beside her. "Come sit." "Alice, please." I sat. I kept a foot of distance between us. Marilyn opened the album. It was old, the pages yellowing. She turned to a picture of me and Tessa as toddlers, playing in a plastic pool. Harold was in the background, manning a grill. "Look at that," Marilyn said softly. "He loved you girls so much. He did everything for this family. He did." I said. She turned the page. "You know," Marilyn said, her voice taking on a meditative quality, "the most important thing to Dad was peace. He hated conflict. He used to tell me, 'Marilyn, keep the girls together. Family is all you have.'" She looked at me. Her eyes were wet. "That is why I am so worried about you." "Alice, worried about me?" I asked. "You seem so fixated," she said. "Asking about the funeral bill, asking about old cabins. It is not like you. It feels like you are looking for villains where there are only people doing their best." I looked at the photo of Harold. He didn't look peaceful in the photo. He looked tired. "I'm just trying to understand what happened." "Mom," I said. Marilyn slammed the album shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. "What happened is that he died. she cried out. Her face twisted. He died. And he left a mess. And I am the one cleaning it up. I am the one dealing with the lawyers and the taxes and the stress. And instead of helping me, you are running around town depositing fake checks and interrogating funeral directors. She grabbed my hand. Her grip was painful. Alice, listen to me. If you keep digging, you are going to find things you don't understand. You are going to tear this family apart, and everyone in Briar Glen, is going to know what kind of person you are. They will know you are the greedy daughter who sued her own mother over a misunderstanding. Is that a threat? I asked quietly. Marilyn dropped my hand. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. It is a promise, she said coldly. Do not make yourself the enemy. Alice, you do not have the stomach for it. She walked to the door. Enjoy the lasagna, she said. When the door clicked shut, I went to the kitchen and threw the lasagna, foil and all, into the trash. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my cousin Lena. Lena was the only person in the family who didn't worship Marilyn, mostly because she lived in Chicago and saw the dysfunction from a safe distance. Lena: Hey, heads up, don't post anything in the family group chat, and don't answer if Tessa baits you. Me: Why? Lena: Tessa is screenshotting everything. She sent a screenshot of your text about the funeral bill to Aunt Sarah with the caption, Alice is spiraling. They are building a file. Alice, they are telling everyone you are having a mental breakdown. I stared at the screen. Peacekeeping. Marilyn had called it. It wasn't peacekeeping, it was surveillance. They were seeding the narrative. They were painting me as unstable so that when I finally revealed the truth, the deed, the bank account, the lies, no one would believe me. They would just nod and say, Poor Alice. She really lost it when Harold died. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. They were better at this than I was. They had been playing this game for years. 2 days later, the invitation came. It wasn't really an invitation. It was a summons. Family dinner at Mom's. Friday, 6 p.m. No excuses. We need to clear the air. I debated not going. Mara had told me to be careful. But if I didn't go, I proved their point. If I didn't go, I was the unstable recluse. I dressed carefully. I wore a navy blue blouse and tailored trousers. I pulled my hair back. I looked like a senior billing analyst. I looked sane. When I arrived at Marilyn's house, the atmosphere was stifling. The curtains were drawn. The table was set with the good china. Tessa was there, wearing a sympathetic smile that made my skin crawl. Her husband, Mark, was there, looking uncomfortable and checking his watch. Marilyn was at the head of the table, looking like a martyr. We sat down. The food was passed in silence. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, comfort food that tasted like ash. Alice, Tessa said, breaking the silence, we are all so glad you came. I nodded. Thank you. We are worried. Alice, Tessa said. She put her fork down. Mom says you have been acting very erratic. I cut a piece of chicken. Erratic how? Checking up on us, Marilyn said from the head of the table. Calling the funeral home. It is paranoid. Alice, it is obsessive. I put my knife down. I looked at them. I asked for a receipt. I said calmly, Since when is asking for a receipt paranoid? Since you started treating your family like criminals, Marilyn snapped. Tessa reached out and touched my arm. Alice, look, we know you are grieving. We know you are under a lot of stress at work. It is okay to not be okay, but this obsession with money, with the check Grandpa wrote, it is not healthy. It is making you look unstable. Unstable. I repeated, Yes, Tessa said. We think you should talk to someone. Maybe take a leave of absence. They were doing it. They were actively gaslighting me in real time. They were trying to get me to agree that I was crazy. I took a sip of water. I let the silence stretch. I looked at Tessa. I looked at Marilyn. If the check was fake, I said, my voice steady and low, why are you so afraid of me proving it? The room went dead silent. Mark looked down at his plate. Tessa's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Marilyn went rigid. If it was a prop, I continued, then it meant nothing. It was just a piece of paper. Why would depositing a piece of paper cause a family crisis? Why would you lie about the funeral costs to get the money back? I didn't lie, Tessa shrilled. I was estimating. You asked for $20,000. I said, the bill was $400. That is not an estimate. That is a markup. Marilyn stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Get out, she whispered. I stood up. I picked up my purse. I am leaving. I said, but I am not unstable. And I am not wrong. I walked out of the house. My legs were shaking, but my head was clear. I didn't go home. I went to my office at Redwood Utilities. I needed to be somewhere that made sense, somewhere where numbers were absolute. I logged into my personal email. I had a notification from Pioneer Hearth Credit Union. It was a secure message. I logged into the portal. David, the rep, had sent me a message. Ms. Hughes, per your request for clarification on the care transfers referenced in our meeting. The automatic transfer labeled Care, Receipt Required, in the amount of $1,500 monthly was canceled on November 15th via telephone authorization. The caller provided the correct security answers at that time. November 15th, that was 2 months before Harold died. $1,500, that money was likely for his in-home health aid. A kind woman named Mrs. Higgins, who came 3 times a week to help him with bathing and meal prep. I sat back in my office chair. If they stopped the transfer in November, who paid Mrs. Higgins? Or did they stop paying her? I pulled up the obituary for Harold. I looked for the mentions. Survived by his loving daughter, Marilyn. I searched for Mrs. Higgins' number. I had it in my old phone contacts from when I had set up the schedule. I called her. It was 8 o'clock at night. But I didn't care. Hello? Her voice was warm, familiar. Mrs. Higgins, this is Alice Hughes, Harold's granddaughter. Oh, Alice. Heavy silence followed. I was so sorry to hear about your grandfather. I wanted to come to the service, but, well, I didn't think it was appropriate. Mrs. Higgins, I have a question. I said, did you continue working for Grandpa through December? There was a long pause. No, honey, she said. Your mother let me go in mid-November. She said they were moving his care in-house to save money. She said the family would take turns. I closed my eyes. And did they? I asked. Did they take turns? I don't know for sure, Mrs. Higgins said, but I dropped by once in December to bring him some Christmas cookies. He was alone. Alice. The apartment it wasn't clean. He looked very thin. He told me he hadn't had a hot meal in 2 days. Tears pricked my eyes. Hot tears. Angry tears. He had the money. I whispered, he had the money to pay you. Mrs. Higgins sighed. I know he did. He was a proud man. But your mother said the accounts were frozen. She said there was no liquidity. Thank you, Mrs. Higgins. I said, I hung up. They hadn't just stolen the cabin. They hadn't just tried to steal the $20,000. They had cut off his care. They had fired his aide to save money that wasn't theirs to save. And they had left him alone in a dirty apartment, eating cold food. While they transferred his vacation home into an LLC, they had neglected him to death, and they had done it all while telling everyone how much they sacrificed for him. I looked at the receipts folder on my phone. Quitclaim deed, capacity evaluation, stop payment, Mrs. Higgins' testimony. This wasn't a dispute anymore. This was a war. I picked up my phone and called Mara Grafton. Alice? She answered. It is late. I know. I said, I found out why the transfer stopped. They fired his nurse. They left him alone. I heard Mara take a sharp breath. Okay, she said. That changes the complexion of things. I am done. Mara, I said, I am done being managed. I am done being the uptight one. I am done being the peacekeeper. What do you want to do? Mara asked. I don't want to sue them for money. I said, I don't want a payout. Then what? I want the truth. I said, I want it in writing. I want the deed reversed. I want the money returned to the estate, and I want everyone to know that he wasn't confused. He was betrayed. I paused, looking at the city lights blinking outside my office window. They want a fight? I asked. Yes, Mara said. I think they do. Then let's give them one, I said. But we are going to do it my way. No screaming, no drama, just receipts. Mason Ridge was the kind of town that looked like a postcard from a distance and a ghost town up close. It was an hour north of Briar Glen, nestled around a man-made lake that had been popular in the 90s. I drove past shuttered bait shops and diners with peeling paint, following the GPS to the address listed on the notary stamp. Elliot Vance did not work out of a law office. He worked out of a majestic but crumbling Victorian house that had been converted into a multi-use commercial space. His office was in the back, shared with a tax preparer. I walked in at 10 in the morning. A bell chimed above the door. Elliot Vance looked nothing like the seasoned legal professionals my family usually employed. He was young, maybe 25, with messy hair and a tie that was loose at the collar. He looked up from his phone when I entered, his eyes widening slightly. "Can I help you?" he asked. I placed the copy of the quitclaim deed on his desk. "I am Alice Hughes." I said, "You notarized this deed for my grandfather, Harold Hughes, 2 months ago." Elliot looked at the paper, then at me. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "Oh," he said. "Right. Mr. Hughes. I need to see the logbook entry for this transaction." I said. Elliot shifted in his chair. The leather squeaked. I am not sure I can just show you that," he said. "It is private information. I am a beneficiary of his estate," I said, keeping my voice level, "and I have concerns about the circumstances of the signing." Elliot stood up. He walked to a filing cabinet and unlocked it. He pulled out a bound ledger. He flipped through the pages, his movements jerky. "Here," he said. "November 12th. I looked at the entry. Harold Hughes. Quitclaim deed. ID. Verified. Driver's license." I looked at the signature in the book. It was a scribble, even worse than the one on the deed. It trailed off the line. "Where did this signing take place?" I asked. "The deed says Briar County. Your office is in Mason Ridge." Elliot hesitated. He looked at the door as if hoping someone would walk in and save him. "I traveled for it," he said. "It was a mobile notary service." "To where?" I asked. "To a private residence," he said, "on Willow Creek Drive, my mother's house." I looked at him. Was Harold Hughes alone when he signed this? "No," Elliot said quickly. "His daughter was there, and his granddaughter, the blonde one, Tessa. And was Mr. Hughes alert?" I asked. "Did he converse with you?" Elliot closed the book. He didn't look at me. He looked at his hands. He was quiet. Elliot said, "He seemed tired." "The daughter, Mrs. Miller?" "She did most of the talking. She explained to him where to sign. She held the pen for him at first, to get him started." "He held the pen?" I asked. "Or she guided his hand?" Elliot winced. "Look, lady," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. It was awkward. "Okay?" The guy looked like he just wanted to go back to sleep, but they were very insistent. They kept saying, "Dad, just sign it so we can go have lunch. Dad, don't be difficult. Don't be difficult." The Hughes family motto. I pointed to the column in the logbook for the ID photocopy. It was blank. "Where's the copy of his ID?" I asked. Elliot rubbed the back of his neck. "I must have forgotten to paste it in," he said. "Or maybe the machine was broken. I saw it, though. I swear I saw it." "You saw it," I said, "but you didn't keep a record of it, and you notarized a document for a man who couldn't hold his own pen, in a house that wasn't his, while 2 women pressured him to sign." Elliot looked miserable. "I didn't want any trouble," he said softly. "They were intense. The older woman, she made it sound like it was a medical emergency, like they needed to sell the property to pay for his heart medication or something. She said I was helping him. I felt a surge of pity mixed with disgust. He wasn't a villain. He was just weak. He had been bulldozed by Marilyn's urgency, just like the rest of us. "Thank you, Elliot," I said. I turned to leave. "Hey," he called out. I stopped. If this becomes a thing, he said, his voice shaking, I don't want to lose my license. I just wanted to help. Then write it down. I said without turning around. Write down exactly what happened while you still remember it. Because it is going to become a thing. I drove to the cabin. I hadn't been there in 15 years. My memories of it were hazy. Smell of pine needles. The sound of water slapping against the dock. Harold teaching me how to bait a hook. I pulled onto the gravel driveway. The cabin was gone. Well, not gone, but the cabin I remembered, the rustic, brown-shingled cottage with the slightly sagging porch, had been erased. In its place stood a construction site. The siding had been stripped. Tyvek wrap covered the walls. A dumpster in the front yard was overflowing with debris, old wood, shingles, and what looked like Harold's old armchair. My heart lurched. They threw away his chair. A white pickup truck was parked near the house. A man in work boots was loading tools into the bed. The logo on the truck read Rowan Lake Renovations. I parked my sedan and got out. The air smelled of sawdust and fresh paint. The man looked up. He was burly, with a gray beard. Can I help you? He asked. I walked up the driveway. I'm just looking. I said, my grandfather used to own this place. Harold Hughes. The man nodded. Nice spot. Good bones. I looked at the house. It looks like a big project. I said, gut renovation, the man said. New kitchen, new bath. Popping the roof to add a loft. Going to be a rental machine when it is done. High end. A rental machine. Who hired you? I asked. The new owners. He said, a company. Bright Hollow Ventures? I asked. That is the one. He said. I looked at the dumpster again. I saw a lampshade sticking out. It was the lamp that used to sit on Harold's bedside table. They must have a big budget. I said, to do all this so fast? Oh yeah, the man said. He chuckled. They pay in cashier's checks. Up front. Never seen a client so eager to spend money to get things moving. Usually, I am chasing people for payments. This lady? She hands me an envelope every Friday. This lady? Is she blonde? I asked. Yeah. The man said, drives a big SUV. Nice lady. Very specific about the finishes. Wants everything modern farmhouse. Tessa. Tessa was renovating Harold's sanctuary into an Airbnb using money that was almost certainly siphoned from his estate. I took a picture of the truck. I took a picture of the dumpster. I took a picture of the permit taped to the window. You mind if I ask? The man said, leaning against his truck. You looking to buy it back when it is done? No, I said. I am looking to take it back. I sat in my car and pulled up the Secretary of State's business search on my phone. Entity name, Bright Hollow Ventures, LLC. Registered agent, Tessa Miller. Formation date, August 15th, 2025. August 15th. I scrolled back through my mental calendar. August was exactly when David at the credit union said the high monitoring flags began. August was when the attempts to change the passwords started. It wasn't a coincidence. Tessa formed the LLC in August. They started trying to crack Harold's bank account in August. They got the deed signed in November. They stopped paying his nurse in November. This wasn't panic. This wasn't grief. This was a business plan. They had decided, 6 months before he died, that Harold was no longer a person. He was an asset to be liquidated, and they had built the infrastructure to do it while he was still sitting in his apartment. Wondering where his mail was, I felt sick, physically sick. I leaned my head against the steering wheel and closed my eyes. My sister, my mother, they had looked at their father, the man who raised them, the man who planted tomatoes and did crosswords, and they had seen a cash cow, and they had looked at me and seen a loose end. The backlash started 2 days later. It began with a phone call from my friend, Sarah. Sarah and I had gone to college together. She was one of the few people I talked to regularly. Alice? She said when I answered. Hey, Sarah, what is up? I just wanted to check on you, she said. Her voice was hesitant. I am okay, I said. Why? Well, your mom called me. She said, My grip on the phone tightened. Why would my mother call you? She sounded really worried. Alice, she said you are not handling things well. She said you have been having outbursts, that you are paranoid. I closed my eyes. She is lying. Sarah. Sarah paused. She said you threatened her at dinner. Alice. She said you were screaming about money. I wasn't screaming. I asked a question. I believe you, Sarah said. But she sounded scared. She asked if I could suggest a therapist for you. She said she is afraid you are going to hurt yourself or someone else. Hurt someone else. That was the escalation. They were moving from Alice is annoying to Alice is dangerous. She is trying to discredit me. Sarah, I said, because I found out she stole money from Grandpa. Sarah was silent for a long moment. Just be careful, Alice. She said, if she is calling me, she is calling everyone. She was right. The next morning, I arrived at Redwood Utilities at 8:30. My badge didn't work on the turnstile. It beeped red. Access denied. I tried it again. Access denied. A security guard I knew. Mike. Walked over. He looked uncomfortable. Ms. Hughes? He said. I have to escort you to HR. My stomach dropped. Why? I asked. I don't know. Ma'am, I just have orders. I walked through the lobby with Mike beside me. I felt the eyes of the receptionist. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. I was the senior billing analyst. I was the responsible one. I was the person who reported the broken coffee machine. Mike walked me to the HR director's office. Ms. Holloway was a stern woman with gray hair cut in a bob. She was sitting behind her desk, looking at a printed email. Sit down. Alice, she said. I sat. We received a communication this morning. Ms. Holloway said. An anonymous tip submitted through our ethics portal. She slid the paper across the desk. Subject: Financial misconduct/employee risk. To whom it may concern, I am writing to report concerning behavior regarding your employee, Alice Hughes. It has come to light that Ms. Hughes is involved in potential check fraud and elder financial abuse regarding a deceased relative, given her access to sensitive billing data at Redwood Utilities. I felt it was my duty to warn you. She is currently under investigation by family attorneys. She is also exhibiting signs of severe mental instability. Signed, a concerned citizen. I stared at the words, check fraud, elder abuse. They were projecting their own crimes onto me, and they were trying to destroy my livelihood to do it. Is this true? Ms. Holloway asked. I looked up. My hands were shaking, but I clasped them together on my lap to steady them. No, I said. Are you involved in a legal dispute regarding a relative's estate? She asked. I took a breath. My grandfather passed away recently. I said, there are questions regarding the administration of his estate, but I am not under investigation for fraud. I am the one asking for the investigation. Ms. Holloway looked at me over her glasses. Alice, you handle millions of dollars in billing adjustments. If there is even a hint of financial impropriety, there is no impropriety. I said, this email was sent by my sister or my mother. They are trying to pressure me to drop my inquiries into their mishandling of the estate. This is a personal family matter. It has nothing to do with Redwood Utilities. I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter from Pioneer Hearth Credit Union. The one verifying the check was legitimate. This is the check they are referring to, I said, sliding it over. It was a gift from my grandfather. The bank verified it. The funds cleared. There is no fraud. Ms. Holloway read the letter. She looked back at the anonymous email. She sighed. We have to investigate every tip. Alice, it is policy. I understand. I said, but I would ask you to consider the timing. I have worked here for 7 years. My reviews are perfect. I have never had a discrepancy in my audits. Ms. Holloway nodded slowly. You are right, she said. Your record is impeccable. She picked up the anonymous email. I am going to mark this as unsubstantiated pending further evidence. She said, but Alice, keep your home life at home. If this drama spills into the office again, if we get calls, or police show up, We will have to have a different conversation. Thank you, I said. I walked back to my desk. My badge worked this time. I sat down and stared at my computer screen. I felt violated. They had crossed the line. They had tried to take my job. They had tried to take my reputation. I wasn't just sad anymore. I was cold. I took out my phone. I texted Tessa, "Meet me at the Starbucks on 3rd. Now. Or I send the invoice to the IRS." It was a bluff. I didn't have a direct line to the IRS. But Tessa didn't know that. Tessa walked into the Starbucks 20 minutes later. She was wearing sunglasses and a trench coat, looking like a celebrity trying to avoid paparazzi. She didn't order anything. She sat down opposite me and crossed her arms. "What is this about, Alice?" she hissed. "You are threatening me?" I placed a piece of paper on the table. It was the photo I had taken of the contractor's truck, printed out at the office. "Rowan Lake Renovations," I said. Tessa didn't flinch. "So? I am renovating the property. It was falling apart, and the contractor told me he is paid by Bright Hollow Ventures." I said. Tessa shrugged. "That is my company. I am managing the asset for Mom." I pulled out a second piece of paper. "The formation document for Bright Hollow Ventures. You formed this company in August," I said, "the same month you started trying to change Grandpa's passwords." Tessa took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were hard. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know you transferred the deed 2 months before he died." I said, "I know you paid the notary to look the other way when Grandpa couldn't even hold the pen. And I know you stopped paying Mrs. Higgins so you could divert that money into your renovation fund." Tessa's face turned red. A patchy, ugly red. "We didn't divert anything," she snapped, her voice rising. "We were managing his cash flow. He didn't need a private nurse. He was sitting in a chair all day. He was hungry." "Tessa," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the coffee shop. "Mrs. Higgins found him alone and hungry. You let him starve so you could put a new roof on a vacation rental." Tessa slammed her hand on the table. People turned to look. "He owed me." She screamed. The silence that followed was total. The baristas stopped grinding beans. The laptop workers looked up. Tessa was breathing hard, her chest heaving, the mask of the grieving. Perfect daughter was gone. Beneath it was something raw and ugly. "He owed me," she repeated, her voice shaking with rage. "I was the one who drove him to his appointments. I was the one who listened to his boring stories about the war. I was the one who dealt with his diapers when he was sick last year." "You?" I asked. "Mrs. Higgins did that." "I managed Mrs. Higgins," Tessa yelled. "I managed everything." "And what did he do?" "He sat on that pile of money and gave me nothing. He wouldn't invest in my business. He wouldn't help me with the mortgage. He just hoarded it. So you took it." I said, "I took what was fair," she hissed. "I am the one who took care of him. You? You were too busy being responsible, Alice. Sitting in your little condo, visiting once a month. You didn't earn anything." She leaned in, her face inches from mine. "You are a parasite. Alice, you are trying to steal my inheritance because you are jealous that I was the one who was actually there." "Inheritance," I said softly. "He wasn't dead yet. Tessa, when you took the house, he was still alive. It wasn't an inheritance. It was theft." Tessa laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Call it what you want. The deed is recorded. The money is spent. And you? You have a $20,000 check and a letter from a dead man. You can't prove anything." She stood up, buttoning her coat. "Stop digging, Alice, or I will bury you." She turned and marched out. I sat there, looking at the empty chair. He owed me. That was it. That was the core of it. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about grief. It was about transaction. She felt she had put in the time, so she was entitled to the payout, and Harold's refusal to die fast enough had been an inconvenience she had solved with paperwork. I went straight to Mara Grafton's office. I told her everything: the notary, the contractor, the HR meeting, Tessa's confession. Mara listened, taking furious notes. "We have enough," she said finally. "Enough for what?" "Enough to file for a formal judicial review of the estate." She said, and enough to request an emergency preservation order. She pulled a file from her stack. I spoke to the legal department at Pioneer Hearth this morning. Mara said, "They have been waiting for us to make a move." Waiting? They have the logs. Alice, they have recordings of the phone calls where someone pretending to be Harold tried to authorize transfers. They suspected fraud, but without a beneficiary challenging the estate. They couldn't release the data to law enforcement. My mouth fell open. They recorded the calls? Banks record everything, Mara said with a grim smile. She pushed a document toward me. Sign this. It officially contests the validity of the quitclaim deed and alleges breach of fiduciary duty by the power of attorney. I signed it. The pen felt heavy in my hand. This is the nuclear option. Alice, Mara said, once we file this, there is no going back. The court will freeze everything. The renovation will stop. The accounts will be locked. Your mother and sister will be served with subpoenas. Do it, I said, that evening. I was sitting on my balcony, watching the sun set over Briar Glen. I felt drained, empty. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? Alice? The voice was deep, gravelly. It is Reverend Wexler, the pastor who had led the funeral service. Reverend, I said, sitting up. Is everything okay? I am fine. Alice, he said, I am calling because of a promise I made. A promise? Your grandfather came to see me a few weeks before he passed. Reverend Wexler said, he asked me to keep something for him. He said, if you hear that Alice is in trouble, or if the family starts acting unchristian, give her this message. My throat tightened. What message? He gave me a note. The Reverend said, I have it right here. It is short. Read it. Please. I heard the crinkle of paper. They will say she is crazy. She is not. They will say I was confused. I was not. I am simply tired of being a bank account. Tell Alice to look at the date on the will. The date on the will? I asked. That is all it says. Reverend Wexler said. And then, there is a P.S. What is the P.S.? Tell her I am proud of her. She is the only one who is real. I let out a sob. It came out of nowhere, a jagged sound that hurt my chest. He knew, I whispered. He knew exactly what they would do. He was a wise man, the Reverend said softly, and he loved you very much. Alice, I have heard the rumors. Your mother called the church office. I closed my eyes. Of course she did. I told her that the church does not gossip, Reverend Wexler said firmly, and that as far as I'm concerned, you are the granddaughter who held his hand at the hospital while everyone else was on their phones. Thank you, Reverend. I said. I hung up. Tell Alice to look at the date on the will. I didn't have the will. Marilyn had it. She had waved it around but never let me read it. But Mara could get it. I looked out at the city. The lights were turning on, one by one. I realized then that I wasn't grieving Harold anymore. I was grieving the family I thought I had. I was grieving the illusion that my mother loved me unconditionally, or that my sister was just high-strung but ultimately harmless. That family was dead. It had died in a notary's office in Mason Ridge. It had died in a text message to my boss. I wiped my face. I wasn't the uptight one anymore. I wasn't the peacekeeper. I was the plaintiff, and tomorrow I was going to serve them. The invitation arrived in my inbox with a digital flourish of faux calligraphy, a celebration of the life and legacy of Harold Hughes. The Emerald Room, Briar Glen Event Center. Saturday, 5 o'clock. It was titled A Celebration. But as I read the itinerary, I recognized it for what it was, a coronation. Marilyn was cementing her status as the grieving, burdened matriarch, and Tessa was positioning herself as the heir apparent. But beneath the surface, there was a darker purpose. This wasn't just about honoring Harold. It was a stage. They needed to lock in the narrative before my questions started to leak out. They needed to gather the extended family, the cousins from Cleveland, the aunts from Florida, the old neighbors, and inoculate them against me. They needed to paint me as the villain so that when the subpoenas finally landed, Everyone would say, "Oh, that's just Alice. She went off the deep end." I sat at my kitchen table, my finger hovering over the decline button. I couldn't go. The thought of walking into that room, seeing the pitying stares, hearing the whispered lies, it made my chest tight. I wanted to stay in my condo, lock the door, and let the lawyers handle it. I called Mara Grafton. "Don't go," I told her. "I can't do it. It is a trap. It is a trap." Mara agreed, her voice calm over the speakerphone. "But if you don't go, you are letting them spring it without you. You are letting them write the history of your grandfather's death unchallenged. I am not a fighter, Mara." I said, "I am an analyst. I look at spreadsheets. I don't do public confrontations. You don't need to fight." Mara said, "You just need to correct the record. If you stay home, you are the unstable recluse they say you are. If you go, and you stand there, calm and sane, you break their story just by existing." She paused. "But Alice, if you go armed. You don't argue with feelings. You argue with receipts. Do it once. Do it cleanly. And then walk away. No shouting. No chaos. Just the truth." I hung up. I looked at the invitation again. Legacy. They were stealing his legacy. They were turning his life into a piggy bank and his death into a cover-up. I hit accept. The preparation was mechanical. It had to be, or I would have fallen apart. I bought a simple black folder. Inside, I placed 5 documents. I arranged them in a specific order, like a presentation for a board meeting. Document 1. A high-resolution printout of the cleared check image from my banking app, showing the amount and the status funds available. Document 2. The email from the funeral home stating the prepaid balance and the outstanding cost of $400. Stapled to a printout of the text message where Tessa asked for $20,000 to cover costs. Document 3. The public record of the quitclaim deed transfer, highlighting the date, 2 months before Harold died, and the notary's location at Marilyn's house. Document 4. The Secretary of State registration for Bright Hollow Ventures, LLC, showing Tessa as the owner and the formation date in August. Document 5. The secure message from Pioneer Hearth Credit Union confirming that the care transfers were canceled in November via telephone authorization. I didn't include the medical records. That felt too private. I didn't include the notary's logbook confession. That was for the court. These 5 documents were enough. They were a narrative in paper form. On the morning of the event, I dressed in a charcoal gray suit. It was severe, almost armor-like. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun. I applied my makeup with surgical precision. My cousin Lena texted me while I was putting on my shoes. Lena, just so you know, the vibe is bad. Marilyn has been working the phones all week. Me, what is she saying? Lena, she is telling people you stole money. She says you took a fake check that Grandpa wrote as a joke and tricked the bank into cashing it. She says you are manic, and Tessa is telling everyone you are jealous because Grandpa chose her to manage the estate. Me, trick the bank? That is not even possible. Lena, logic doesn't matter. Alice, they are betting on confidence. If they say it loud enough, people believe it. Just be ready. They are going to freeze you out. I stared at the phone. Trick the bank. It was such a desperate, stupid lie, but it was dangerous. It framed me not just as greedy, but as criminal. I grabbed the black folder. I grabbed my purse. I wasn't going there to be liked. I was going there to be heard. The emerald room was draped in white linen and pale blue hydrangeas. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers. A large slideshow of Harold's life was projected onto the back wall. Photos of him fishing, gardening, holding babies. I noticed immediately that I was absent from most of the photos. Tessa was in dozens of them. Marilyn was in almost all of them. I was a ghost in my own family history. The room was crowded. There were maybe 50 people there. I recognized my great-aunt Sarah, my cousins from the coast, neighbors I hadn't seen in years. When I walked in, the conversation didn't stop, but it shifted. A ripple of silence moved through the room as people noticed me. Heads turned, eyes averted. I walked to the bar and asked for a club soda. The bartender smiled at me, unaware that I was the villain of the evening. Alice. I turned. It was Aunt Sarah. She looked older, frailer. She was holding a glass of white wine with a trembling hand. "Hello, Aunt Sarah," I said. She looked me up and down, her expression a mix of pity and disapproval. "Your mother said you might not come," Sarah said. "She said you were unwell." "I am fine." "Sarah," I said, "I am just grieving." Sarah pursed her lips. "Grief does strange things to people, Alice. It makes them do things they can't take back, like taking things that aren't theirs." The words were soft, but they hit like a slap. Taking things that aren't theirs. I didn't take anything. "Aunt Sarah," I said quietly. She shook her head, backing away. "Don't make a scene. Alice, for your grandfather's sake, just try to be dignified." She walked away, leaving me standing alone with my club soda. I scanned the room. Marilyn was near the front, holding court. She looked radiant in black silk, clutching a tissue she wasn't using. Tessa was beside her, looking solemn and capable, accepting hugs from relatives. They looked like the perfect bereaved family. They looked like the victims. I felt a wave of nausea. Maybe I should leave. Maybe I should just walk out the back door and let them have this. What was the point of fighting? They had the numbers. They had the story. Then, I saw the slideshow change. It was a photo of Harold sitting on the porch of the cabin, the real cabin, the one with the brown shingles and the sagging porch. He was smiling, holding a stringer of fish. I remembered that day. I was the one holding the camera. I was 12. He had told me, "Alice, capture this. This is the good life." They had sold that porch for $1. They had torn it down. They had turned his good life into a rental machine. The nausea vanished. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I gripped the black folder. I wasn't leaving. The speeches began at 5:30. Marilyn stood at the podium, bathed in a warm spotlight. She adjusted the microphone. She looked out at the crowd with tear-filled eyes. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice trembling just the right amount. Dad would have loved this. He loved a party. He loved his family. A murmur of agreement went through the room. These last few months were so hard. Marilyn said, "Watching a man as strong as Harold fade. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I'm so grateful that I could be there for him, that Tessa and I could carry the burden so he didn't have to." She wiped her eye. Dad was a generous man. She continued, "He would give you the shirt off his back, but toward the end, his generosity, it became a little confused. He wanted to give everyone everything. He lost his sense of reality." I felt the muscles in my neck tighten. "Here it comes. He wrote checks to the mailman," she said with a sad chuckle. "He promised things to people that he didn't have. It was innocent. It was just his way of feeling useful. But it has caused confusion." She paused, letting the word hang in the air. She didn't look at me. She looked over my head, at the back wall. "It breaks my heart," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It breaks my heart that there are people, even people he loved, who confuse that confusion with a promise, who confuse love with entitlement, who see a tragic decline and see an opportunity for a payout." The room was silent. You could hear a pin drop. Everyone knew who she was talking about. She didn't have to say my name. She had painted the silhouette perfectly. "We have to forgive them," Marilyn said, looking down at her hands. "Grief makes people desperate. We have to forgive the grasping. We have to forgive the greed, because Dad would have forgiven it." She looked up. "Beatific. So let us remember the real Harold. Not the confused man at the end, but the man who built this family." She stepped back. The room erupted in applause. People were wiping their eyes. Tessa hugged her. It was a masterclass. She had just publicly absolved herself of stealing his estate while simultaneously branding me a predator. "Does anyone else have a few words?" Marilyn asked, returning to the mic. The room was quiet. No one moved. I set my club soda down on a high-top table. I walked toward the front of the room. My heels clicked on the hardwood floor. The sound was rhythmic, loud. Click, click, click. The applause died down. People turned. I saw Tessa's eyes widen. I saw Marilyn's smile falter. I walked up the steps to the small stage. Marilyn didn't move from the podium. She stared at me, her eyes warning me. "Don't you dare!" I reached for the microphone. Marilyn held onto it for a second, a silent tug of war. Before she let go and stepped back, crossing her arms, I stood there. The lights were bright. I couldn't see the faces in the back, but I could see Aunt Sarah in the front row. She looked terrified. My hands were shaking. I placed the black folder on the podium to steady them. "I am not good at speeches," I said. My voice wavered. I cleared my throat and started again. "I am not good at speeches. I am a data analyst. I work with numbers." The room was dead silent. It wasn't a friendly silence. It was the silence of a crowd watching a car crash. "My mother talks about confusion," I said. "She talks about how Grandpa was confused at the end, how he wrote fake checks, how he didn't know what was real." I opened the folder. "I'm not here to talk about feelings," I said. "I am just here to clear up the confusion." I pulled out the first document, the image of the check. I held it up. It was large enough for the front row to see. "This is the check Harold Hughes wrote to me 3 weeks before he died." I said, "My mother told me it was a prop. She told all of you it was fake. She said I was embarrassing myself by trying to deposit it." I looked directly at Marilyn. "I deposited it on January 24th. I said, "It cleared the next day. $20,000. I turned back to the crowd. "Banks do not clear fake checks from empty accounts." I said, "The money was there. It is still there." Marilyn let out a sharp, theatrical sob. She stepped forward. "Oh, Alice," she cried out, "this is exactly what I mean. You are flaunting money at a funeral. You are bragging about taking money from a dying man." The crowd murmured, "Disgusting." Someone whispered. I didn't flinch. I waited for her to finish. "I am not bragging." "Mom," I said calmly into the mic, "I am asking a question. If the check was fake, why did you tell me it was? And if you knew it was real, why did you ask me to give it back?" I pulled out the second document, the invoice, 3 days after the funeral. My sister Tessa asked me to transfer the $20,000 to my mother. I said, "She told me the funeral costs were astronomical. She said the family was drowning in bills." I held up the email from the funeral home. "This is the invoice from Briar Glen Memorial." I said, "The total cost was $8,000. It was prepaid by Grandpa's insurance 5 years ago. The outstanding balance was $400. I let the paper drop onto the podium. There was no bill. I said, "There was no emergency. You tried to guilt me into giving back a gift that Grandpa wanted me to have. You lied about the cost of his own funeral to get the money back." The murmur in the room changed tone. It wasn't disgust anymore. It was confusion. Tessa stormed up the stairs. Her face was flushed. "Stop it," she hissed, reaching for the mic. "You are unstable. You are obsessed. Everyone knows you are having a breakdown." I pulled the mic away. I turned to the audience. "They say I'm unstable." I said, "They say I'm difficult." I opened the folder again. I pulled out a photocopy of Harold's letter. Grandpa left me a letter. I said, "He wrote it 6 months ago. He gave it to his attorney, Mara Grafton, to hold until I proved I was ready." I looked down at the paper. He wrote, "I am sorry for the tests. You know how loud your family gets when money is near. The $20,000 is not a reward. It is a starter key. It is enough to make you unpressurable." I looked up. Tessa had stopped moving. She was staring at the letter. "Unpressurable," I repeated. "He knew you would try to take it. He knew you would try to spin it. He gave me the money so I wouldn't have to be afraid of you anymore." Marilyn was shaking her head violently. "He never wrote that," she shouted. "That is a forgery. He was senile." I pulled out the third document, the quitclaim deed. "Was he senile on November 12th? I asked, because that is the day he signed a quitclaim deed transferring his cabin in Mason Ridge to Bright Hollow Ventures, LLC. I held up the deed. He signed this at your house. Mom, I said, he signed it in front of a notary you hired, and you transferred the property for $1. I held up the fourth document, the LLC registration, and Bright Hollow Ventures is owned by Tessa Miller. I said. The room gasped, a literal, audible gasp. The cousins from Cleveland looked at each other. Aunt Sarah put her hand over her mouth. If he was too confused to write a check in January, I said, looking at Marilyn, then he was too confused to sign a deed in November. You can't have it both ways. You can't say he was competent when he gave you a house, and incompetent when he gave me a check. Marilyn looked like she had been slapped. Her mouth opened and closed. She looked at the crowd, searching for an ally, but the faces looking back at her were cold. They were doing the math. I pulled out the final document, the banknote about the canceled transfers, and finally, I said, the care. My voice broke for the first time. I took a breath. Grandpa had an automatic transfer set up to pay Mrs. Higgins, his health aide. I said, it was $1,500 a month. I held up the banknote. It was canceled by phone on November 15th. I said, 2 months before he died. I looked at Tessa. You fired his nurse. I said, you told Mrs. Higgins there was no money. You stopped the payments. And you left him alone in that apartment. Mrs. Higgins found him hungry. Tears ran down my face now, but I didn't wipe them. You took his house. I said, you tried to take his check, but the worst thing you did was take his care. You let him suffer to save money for your renovation. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy. It was suffocating. Tessa was crying now. But it wasn't a performance. It was the ugly, panicked crying of someone who has been caught. Marilyn was gripping the podium, her knuckles white, staring at me with pure hatred. I closed the black folder. I gathered my papers. I am not here to take anything from you. I said into the microphone, I don't want the cabin. I don't want the estate. I looked out at the family, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins. I just wanted you to know the truth. I said, I wanted you to know that he wasn't confused. He was betrayed. I took a step back. I have filed a formal petition for a judicial review of the estate this morning. I announced, my attorney, Mara Grafton, has requested a preservation order for all banking records, including the call logs from Pioneer Hearth Credit Union. Marilyn flinched at the words, call logs. If anyone here has information about Harold's last months. I said, please contact Mara Grafton. I placed the microphone back on the stand. It made a loud thud. I picked up my folder. I walked down the stairs. The room fractured. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Did she say he was hungry? The cabin? I thought they sold that years ago. For $1? Tessa owns the company? I walked down the center aisle. People moved out of my way. They weren't ignoring me now. They were looking at me with wide, shocked eyes. Aunt Sarah reached out a hand as I passed, as if to touch my arm. But I kept walking. I didn't stay to hear the excuses. I didn't stay to hear Marilyn's scream or Tessa's defense. I walked out the double doors of the Emerald Room. I walked through the lobby. I walked out into the cool evening air of Briar Glen. My hands were trembling so hard I dropped my keys. I had to crouch down to pick them up. I felt like I was going to throw up. It wasn't a triumph. It felt like a demolition. I had just blown up my family. I had just destroyed my mother's reputation in front of everyone she knew. I got into my car and locked the doors. I sat there for a moment, breathing in the smell of old upholstery and silence. I looked at the passenger seat. The black folder sat there, unpressurable. I started the car. The real fight was just starting. The lawyers, the depositions, the ugly, grinding machinery of the court system. It was all waiting for me. But as I pulled out of the parking lot, watching the event center fade in my rearview mirror, I knew one thing. They would never rewrite his memory again. The silence in my car after I left the event center was heavy, but it was a clean silence. It was the silence of a room after a loud machine has finally been turned off. I drove with the radio off, listening to the hum of the tires on the asphalt, watching the streetlights of Briar Glen blur past like stars in a warped tunnel. I didn't go straight home. I drove around the perimeter of the city, aimless, letting the adrenaline fade into a dull, throbbing ache behind my eyes. I had done it. I had dropped the bomb. But the problem with dropping a bomb is that you are still standing in the blast radius. My phone, which I had tossed onto the passenger seat, lit up. Then it lit up again, and again. It buzzed against the leather, an angry, persistent insect. I didn't look at it until I was parked safely in my garage. The screen was full of notifications. First, a text from Marilyn. It was long, a wall of gray text that took up the entire screen. Marilyn. Alice, I do not know who you think you are or what you think you accomplished tonight, but you are cruel, unforgivable, to humiliate your mother in front of the entire family, to ruin your grandfather's memorial with your paranoia. You are sick. I am shaking. You need to retract everything you said immediately. You need to send an email to everyone tonight apologizing for your breakdown. If you do not fix this, you are dead to me. I read it twice. There was no defense of the facts. There was no I didn't steal the cabin. There was no I didn't fire the nurse. There was only rage that I had broken the code of silence. Then, a text from Tessa. Tessa, my lawyer will be contacting you on Monday. This is defamation per se. You accused me of a crime in a public forum. You better hope you have deep pockets. Alice, because I am going to sue you for every penny of that $20,000 and everything else you own. You are done. I felt a spike of fear, the old, conditioned fear of the younger sister being scolded, but it passed quickly. I looked at the black folder sitting on the passenger seat. I had the receipts. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. I didn't reply. I took a screenshot of Marilyn's text. I took a screenshot of Tessa's threat. I opened my email app and forwarded them to Mara Grafton with the subject line, Post-event harassment. Then I put the phone on Do Not Disturb. I went upstairs to my condo. It looked the same as I had left it, but it felt different. It felt like a fortress now. I locked the deadbolt. I checked the windows. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the dark living room. I expected to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. I just felt a profound, hollow exhaustion. I had won the battle, but I had lost the war for a family. I was an orphan now, not by death, but by choice. The next morning, the counteroffensive began, but it wasn't the one I expected. It came from the institutions. I was drinking coffee, staring at the sunrise, when Mara Grafton called. Alice, she said. Her voice was crisp, professional, but with an undercurrent of energy. I just got off the phone with the legal department at Pioneer Hearth Credit Union. On a Sunday? I asked. Banks don't sleep when they smell liability. Mara said, they received our preservation letter and the affidavit regarding the speech you gave yesterday. They are conducting an expedited internal review, and they can't share the full report yet, Mara said, but the representative told me, off the record, that they have flagged multiple irregularities consistent with identity theft. Identity theft. I repeated. Specifically, Mara said, telephone banking access. They have voice recordings of a female caller attempting to impersonate Harold Hughes to authorize transfers. The caller failed the voice verification protocol 3 times in November, but succeeded once, on the day the nursing payments were stopped. My stomach twisted. Tessa, they are cooperating. Alice, Mara continued, they are terrified. If it comes out that they allowed an unauthorized user to cancel a necessary medical expense for a vulnerable senior, they are on the hook. They are going to throw your family under the bus to save themselves. I didn't imagine it. I whispered, no, Mara said, you didn't. The system saw it too. We just had to force them to look. I hung up the phone. I felt a grim sense of validation. It wasn't just my suspicion. It was data. It was voice logs. It was real. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. It was a number I didn't recognize, with a Mason Ridge area code. I hesitated, then answered, hello? Ms. Hughes? The voice was shaky. Male. This is Elliot. Elliot Vance. The notary. Elliot. I said. I sat up straighter. Why are you calling me? I heard him exhale. A jagged sound. I heard about what happened. He said, my cousin lives in Briar Glen. She was at the event center catering staff. She told me you stood up and showed the deed. I waited. I can't sleep. Ms. Hughes, Elliot said, I haven't slept since you came to my office. You shouldn't, I said coldly. You facilitated a fraud. I know, he said. I know, and I know you are going to report me. But I want to get ahead of it. What do you mean? I am willing to provide a statement, he said. A sworn statement. I won't say I knew it was fraud. I can't say that. Or I go to jail. But I can say that I felt pressured. I can say that the signer appeared coached. Coached, I repeated. Yeah, Elliot said. The daughter. The blonde one. She was whispering to him the whole time, telling him, just do it, Dad. Don't ruin this. And he looked scared. Ms. Hughes, he looked like a kid who was in trouble. I closed my eyes. The image of Harold, proud, stubborn Harold, looking like a scared kid while Tessa bullied him, it broke my heart, if you write that down. I said, my voice thick, and you sign it, and you send it to my attorney. I will ask her to be lenient regarding your license complaint. I will do it today. Elliot said, I don't want to be the reason he lost his house. You already are. Elliot, I said, but you can be the reason we get it back. The final blow came in the mail on Tuesday. It was a plain manila envelope with no return address, just my name written in block letters. But I recognized the handwriting. It wasn't Harold's. It was Reverend Wexler's. I opened it. Inside was a second envelope, smaller, sealed with tape. On the front, in Harold's shaky scrawl, were the words, to whoever tries to make Alice doubt herself. I sat down at the kitchen table. My hands were trembling. I cut the tape. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper, torn from a spiral-bound book. It was a list, a log. October 4th. Tessa came over, asked for the checkbook again. I said no. She yelled. She said I was being selfish. I hid the book in the freezer. October 12th. Mail didn't come today, or yesterday. Called the post office. They said a forwarding order was pending. I didn't file it. October 20th. Marilyn brought lasagna. She was sweet. Asked me to sign a paper for insurance. I refused. She cried. She said I didn't love her. November 2nd. Phone isn't working right. Can't call the bank. Marilyn says it is a network outage. Neighbor says his phone is fine. November 10th. They are taking me for a drive. They say we're going to lunch. I don't want to go. I feel tired. The log ended there. 2 days before the deed was signed. I put the paper down. I put my head in my hands, and I wept. I didn't cry for the loss of the money. I cried for the horror of his last month. He was a prisoner. He was trapped in his own apartment, his communications cut, his mail stolen, his reality gaslit by the two people who were supposed to protect him. And he knew. He knew exactly what they were doing. He was writing it down, documenting his own abuse, hoping that one day I would find it. I hid the checkbook in the freezer. He was fighting a war completely alone, and I was 20 minutes away, sitting in my condo, thinking he was fine because Marilyn told me he was fine. I felt a crushing weight of guilt. I should have visited more. I should have pushed past Marilyn's gatekeeping. I should have known. But then I looked at the letter again. To whoever tries to make Alice doubt herself. He didn't write this to make me feel guilty. He wrote this to give me ammunition. He knew they would call me crazy. He knew they would say I was imagining things. So he left me a witness statement from beyond the grave. He was protecting me, even while he couldn't protect himself. I wiped my face. I took a picture of the log. I sent it to Mara. Alice. Evidence of undue influence and isolation. Dates match the bank irregularities. Mara. This is the smoking gun. Alice. They are finished. 2 days later. On a Thursday evening. The doorbell rang. I checked the camera. It was Marilyn. She wasn't holding a casserole this time. She was holding a small, blue velvet box. She looked tired. Her eyes were puffy. Her makeup minimal. She looked old. I debated not answering. But I knew this was the end game. I unlocked the door. I didn't invite her in. I stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance. "What do you want?" I asked. Marilyn looked at me, her face crumbling into a mask of sorrow. "Alice," she said softly, "please, can we just talk? Like adults? Not like lawyers?" I waited. She held out the blue velvet box. "I found this." She said, "It was your grandmother's brooch, the sapphire one. I know you always admired it. I wanted you to have it." I looked at the box. It was beautiful. It was valuable. It was a bribe. "I don't want it." I said. "Alice, don't be like this," Marilyn said, her voice hitching. "We are family. Families fight. They scream. But they don't destroy each other. They don't drag each other into court. You destroyed him," I said. "You isolated him. You stole his mail. You fired his nurse." Marilyn's face hardened instantly. The sorrow vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. "We did what was necessary," she snapped. "He was hemorrhaging money. That nurse cost a fortune. The cabin was rotting into the ground. We saved the estate. You saved it for yourselves." I said, "It is the same thing," Marilyn cried out. "It all goes to the family eventually. Why does it matter if we took it a few months early? He didn't need it. He was sitting in a chair." I looked at her. She truly believed it. She truly believed that her need for money outweighed his right to dignity. She believed that because he was old, he had ceased to be a person and had become an asset. "It matters because it was his," I said, "and you didn't ask. You took—" Marilyn stepped closer. Her eyes narrowed. "You are feeling very righteous right now." "Alice," she hissed, "you think you are the hero, but you are going to regret this. You are going to regret humiliating me. You are going to be all alone. No one will talk to you. You will have nothing." I looked at her, this woman who had raised me, who had taught me to be polite, to be quiet, to be good. I saw the fear behind her eyes. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing the narrative. "I regret something too." "Mom," I said calmly. "What?" she challenged. "I regret trusting you." I said. I closed the door. I threw the deadbolt. I heard her scream my name once. A raw, ugly sound. Then I heard her heels clicking away down the hall. The legal process, as Mara had warned me, was not a lightning strike. It was a glacier. In the weeks that followed, the adrenaline faded, replaced by the tedious reality of litigation. There were motions filed. There were discovery requests. There were depositions scheduled and rescheduled. Mara informed me that the estate review would take months, maybe a year. It won't be a neat bow. "Alice," she told me over coffee one rainy afternoon, "we will get the deed reversed. We will likely get the nursing money returned. But criminal charges? That is harder. The prosecutor is looking at it, but elder abuse is hard to prove when the victim can't testify." "I understand." I said, "And the family?" Mara hesitated. "They are digging in. Tessa is countersuing for emotional distress. It is frivolous, but it is expensive. They are going to try to drain you. Let them try." I said, "I have the $20,000. It wasn't enough to cover everything, but it was enough to start." Harold was right. It was a starter key. But I realized I couldn't stay in Briar Glen. The city was too small. Every time I went to the grocery store, I felt eyes on me. I saw Tessa's SUV parked at the gym. I heard the whispers. I didn't want to live in a battlefield. I started looking for jobs. I updated my LinkedIn. I looked at cities that were far away. Denver, Austin, Charlotte, places where no one knew the name Hughes. I found a job in Chicago, a senior analyst position at a logistics firm. Better pay, no family history. I accepted it. The week before I moved, I packed up my condo. My life fits into surprisingly few boxes. I was efficient. I was organized. I went to the bank, a new bank, a national one, and transferred my savings. I updated my will, naming a charity as my beneficiary. I removed Marilyn and Tessa from my emergency contacts. It felt like amputation. It hurt, a dull, phantom pain where my family used to be, but it was necessary to survive. I was taping up the last box in the living room when the mail arrived. It was a letter from Mara, Alice. Enclosed is a copy of the preservation order granted by the court this morning. It covers everything. The cabin cannot be sold. The renovation is halted. The bank records are locked. Also, one more thing. We found a safety deposit box key in Harold's personal effects at the nursing home, the ones Mrs. Higgins had saved. We opened it yesterday with the court's permission. There was cash inside, $50,000, and a note. I turned the page. A photocopy of a note, for the cabin roof, or for Alice, whichever needs it more. I stared at the paper. He had a backup plan for his backup plan. He knew. He always knew. My phone rang. It wasn't a number I knew. It wasn't Mara. It wasn't the notary. I let it go to voicemail. I stood there, in the empty white room of my condo, the sunlight streaming in across the dust outlines where my furniture used to be. My phone beeped. New voicemail. I picked it up. I pressed play. The voice was distorted, low. It sounded like it was coming from a tunnel, or maybe just from a burner phone held too close to a mouth. Stop digging. Alice, you don't know what you're doing. You're going to get hurt. It was Tessa, or maybe Mark, or maybe just a fear tactic. I didn't delete it. I saved it. I forwarded it to Mara. Then I put the phone in my pocket. I looked around the room one last time. I wasn't Alice the uptight one anymore. I wasn't Alice the victim. I was Alice the witness. They wanted me to stop digging, but they didn't understand. I wasn't digging anymore. I had found the bottom. I had found the foundation, and I had poured concrete over it. I picked up the box. I walked out the door. I didn't look back. The story wasn't over. The court cases would drag on. The family would fracture further. But I was done being a character in their play. I was writing my own script now, and in my script, the truth wins. Eventually. Thank you for listening to Don't Embarrass Yourself with That Prop. Mom said Grandpa's $20,000 check was fake, so I deposited it. This story of Alice's quiet war against gaslighting and greed is a reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon you have is a simple paper trail. I would love to hear your thoughts on Alice's decision. Did she do the right thing by blowing up the family at the memorial? Or should she have kept the peace? And where are you listening from today? Please leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of justice, karma, and the truth coming to light. Until next time.